Начинаем, да?
We're starting, right? Hello, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. We are beginning the second day of our quite a significant symposium that we have entitled Bratislava is the city of peace, or the capital of peace. In Slovakian, it's Bratislava, главное место Mira. In English, it would be Bratislava is the capital of peace. So I would like to congratulate all the speakers yesterday who spoke at the first phase of our symposium. It ran quite well. For us, it was a great honor that the Slovakian liberal press tried to destroy us. They even compared us with the real peace summit that was held in Switzerland. Thank them for that. And they said, this is where the peace summit was. So if you are for the war in Ukraine and for peace, so thank you for that. We don't want to compare the number of countries representatives, 30 here, or they said more than 100 countries were represented in Geneva. We don't want to be compared with that. We want to hold a quality mark. If in September we are able to create a venue here where the president of Russia will meet with his counterpart in some Western countries who would be prepared to sign the first phase of the document towards the peace agreement, we will address Lord God with the words of gratitude. I would also like to welcome Ms. Komleva, whom I saw on the screen right now. Mrs. Komleva, we're very happy to see you alive and well. Bravo. Thank you very much. Weren't your hands aching of the chains that they gave us, that put you into, or the Austrian chains were quite quite soft. Thank you very much. I'm all right. Main thing is that thoughts shouldn't be in chains. Oh, great, great way to put it. On the other hand, it's a shame that the Austrians did it. I would like to thank one of the major lawyers in international law and so on, a very well-known name, ex-Prime Minister of Slovakia, Mr. Chernobyrsky, who said, we are going to free Mrs. Komleva, and we started to shout, free Komleva, and here you are. Okay, so why don't we start? Valentina Komleva, Doctor of Sociology, Professor, Deputy Director for Research at the National Research Institute for the Development of Communications, NRIDC, in Russia, and a fighter for the human rights, right? Yeah, yesterday, that was the way they introduced her in Austria. Okay, I would like to ask you to present this exciting book, Ukrainian Roulette. Who wins and who loses from the prolongation of the military conflict between Russia and Ukraine? And you know what? Here, we have a certain number of these USB sticks with the recording of the book. So every one of you will be able to take one of those. And here you see the printed original of the book. And again, everyone can take a look. And now it gives me great pleasure to pass the floor on to Ms. Komlerova. Yes, once again, hello, dear colleagues. It's a really great pity for me to welcome you here. This time I wanted to take part in person in Bratislava to meet my colleagues face to face, those I'm not acquainted with and those I am. Uh, but indeed, I failed to do it. And so that there shouldn't be any rumors or misunderstandings or gossip. Uh, it was all quite simple. One small country with a lot of ambitions and perhaps a lot of inhibitions, a member of the European Union, so without any prior notice to either myself or somebody else, he included me in the list of persons barred from entry into the Schengen space. It hurts me a lot because I did a lot for this country, including the popularization of this country in the international stage, building a firm, friendly relations with Russia, and also making sure that the attitude towards this country, including from the EU, should be better. But the result was like this. As a result, the Austrian administrative services were forced not to allow me into the Schengen zone, referring to the principles of the common European policy, and noting that they didn't have any complaints against me, and even they said that we're doing a great thing holding events like the symposium. But nevertheless, they were forced to scrap my Schengen visa that has been issued to me for 5 years by one of the countries, founding countries of the EU. This country has no claims against me either, and we continue running a lot of exciting projects in the sphere of public diplomacy. This was a great experience for me as a researcher to get hands-on experience on how relations within the EU are built. So uh, I took it with a lot of research interest, as if I were using the method of active observation. I would like to thank Vladislav Boseman, my scientific advisor, my manager in the first place, who quickly got involved in resolving this issue, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation that's taking part, and also the embassy of the Russian Federation in Vienna that got in touch with me quite fast. And the situation got resolved. I was sent off to Serbia, and so from here, I am now talking to you from my hotel room, and it gives me a pleasure to see you all here. I think that every situation is a chance, is an opportunity, just like any crisis. This is basically what this book is about. It was written by Vladislav Gosomyanov, and that I have the honor of presenting. Of course, had it been a face-to-face presentation, it would have looked a little bit differently because I was bringing a whole set of boxes with books and things. So maybe what I'll have to do now is to hand them out here in Serbia. But I'm presenting it online. Firstly, a few words about the person, the author of this book, because perhaps he would be too modest to do it himself. He is a researcher and a practitioner at the same time. Vladislav spent a lot of time working in the system of state governance, international security. He worked in business, in large international companies. So, as a practitioner, he knows all these processes inside out, and he has had personal experience organizing these processes or resolving some conflicts. In addition to that, he is also a doctor of science and head of department in Moscow State Institute for International Relations, MGIMO. It's, it's University of International Relations. It's one of the largest universities in the Russian Federation, training specialists in diplomacy and international relations. So in this way, at the interface of a lot of practical experience and theoretical knowledge, this book has been prepared. I know that Vladislav has spent a lot of time thinking about it, including whether to write it at all or not. Also, he conducted a lot of analyses of other literature and other books in this sphere, perhaps hoping that someone would put this material in a system and write about this. But unfortunately, he didn't find anyone to do that, and the colleagues who were working together with us couldn't find such materials either. And so Vladislav made a decision to prepare this book himself. So its meaning is, or intent is in showing the internal processes running in the European Union against the background of the Ukrainian conflict, and also the external processes related to this conflict. We know that over the past 5 years, our civilizations has run into two major challenges: the pandemic, and as it turns out, the second challenge is the war in the European space. So this book is basically a direct and open conversation about this. This book talks about what other people prefer to keep silent about, or maybe they speak, but in some small, limited conference in close circles. In Europe, it's even dangerous to talk about that. In the US, they have their own interests. For them, Europe is a tool to realize their global ambitions. So therefore, this book was targeted at making it so that regardless of any black technologies, different cliches or radical opinions, so that it should be written in such a way that consciousness and calm analysis should prevail. I would like to specifically comment that this book is not propaganda, and this is the way to treat it. Perhaps it may contain, some may think that it contains too much statistic and factual data, but this is done to provide arguments for the conclusions that the author has arrived at. The main position of the author is to show reasonable solutions. So what makes the book different? Firstly, it includes unique statistic. This statistic has been systematized, analyzed, brought together in separate spreadsheets, and also comparative analysis of statistical data have been conducted, based on which conclusions are being made. Also, the book discloses exciting, interesting, and deep-seated connections, dependencies between different actors, the authorities, corporations, individuals. So it brings up a layer of information that's not available to the large circle of readership. Of course, people rotating in close circles, experts are aware of that, but we haven't yet known a conflict like that in the West. So this makes this book unique, and in essence, it gives the politico-economic analysis of the Ukrainian conflicts for the first time. What conclusions has the author arrived after such a deep and serious analysis? Firstly, the involvement of the European Union into this military conflict has damaged the economic situation in Europe as a whole and in separate European countries as well. The conflict is very detrimental to the economy, but nevertheless, EU keeps investing more and more funds in it. And perhaps it has never happened in the new history of Europe, contemporary history of Europe, that the interest of economics should run counter to politics so much. Why is it happening now? The book discloses the reasons, the essence of which lies in the character of business as such, and in the change of the situation where the interests of financial capital investment funds dominate, redirecting investment in more lucrative sectors and assets. You know that the military industrial complex is quite a lucrative sector, profitable sector. And so in spite of the need in settling this conflict and the need to stop wars, not only in Europe, but all over the world, in spite of all this, the interests of the financial capital and investment funds are linked to these wars, or hinge around these wars. So the life cycle of this conflict in Europe would have been much shorter had the industrial sectors of Europe that are now recording losses because of the rise in the prices of energy. So it would be much shorter had they been able to protect their position. But they find themselves in such a dependent position that is absolutely not possible practically. So this book actually explains why this is happening, what kind of dependency they are in. Actually, the direct losses in the European GDP over the 2 years of the military conflict amounted to about 900 euros per capita. That's a lot of money. And the biggest price for this conflict has been paid by Germany. Germany has lost more than anybody else. The book analyzes the positions of different countries, offering comparative analysis of different European countries according to their economic and social indicators, and it becomes very obvious from that that it was Germany that lost more than anybody else. And a conclusion is made that the Anglo-Saxon countries are not interested in Germany and Russia joining their economic interests, and they're just not allowing Germany to do that. And so Germany loses income, revenue, profits, and influence. I know that there are geopoliticians and historians and experts in international relations in this audience, so people are aware of all these concepts. And one of the geopolitical concepts I'm talking about is that if Russia and Germany join economically in the first place, that will form a powerful duo on the international arena. So the main goal of the Saxon countries is not to allow Germany and Russia to join their forces. And so this book talks a lot about that.
So how was this done? This was done by taking away from Germany cheap energy resources and high technologies, and many other measures were taken. I'm sure all of this can be researched and read up on in this book. This book looks at how this mechanism works through the well-known method of controlled chaos. Another interesting point of the book is that it shows how the European economy has suffered as the result of its lack of Russian cheap gas, which pushes it into a new type of energy dependency. Well, they were told, you depended on Russia energy-wise, and now you're sovereign, you're independent from it, and it is proven otherwise in the book. And there is a show that there is a new dependency on the liquefied natural gas, and uh, the gas like this is supplied not just by the United States, but the United States allies, such as Qatar. And the US economy has also been affected in the context of the Ukrainian conflict and in the context of the processes that are taking place in Europe. The conclusion that can be drawn is that the US economy, as it has happened before in history, is demonstrating its resilience and growth as a result of being pulled, or rather as a result of pulling other countries into the conflict by using such methods as providing loans to them and other mechanisms. That is all shown in the book. So it is very beneficial for the United States to pull the European nations into this conflict and to drag this conflict on, because the losses of the EU are growing as a result, and that allows the United States the opportunity to dominate at the expense of the EU and reduce sovereignty and ability to make its own decision of the EU on the international arena and its influence on the principles of the future world order. As a result, a conclusion can be drawn that the United States is losing its strategic advantage, which was the combination of uh, high technologies and cheap energy resources. There's an interesting section in the book that deals with the arms business. Clearly, a lot of countries will get a lot of orders in the long term. The book introduces a number of different new concepts, such as the contingent money or emergency money. What does this mean? This means that corporations may have at their disposal money that has been provided to them as a result of certain contingencies. And that happens when usual rules are bent to get the money. And as a result, new actors are emerging that drive the economic and political development of the EU, but not only the EU, of the entire world. Different lobbying schemes are being analyzed that are tied to these emergency or contingency funds. Well, I don't want to give you a summary of the book. I can just tell you that there are a lot of interesting new concepts that are introduced, different new approaches to research. I think this is something that the experts community will find useful. The book is written in such a well-defined language, at least in Russian and in English, that it is a fun book to read, and it makes it easy for you to understand all of these processes. This book has been translated into such languages as German and French and Spanish. I am not fluent enough in those languages to assess the quality of those translations, but I hope it is as good as the translation into English. And in summary, I would like you to pass this book on to your colleagues, distribute it, promote it, and use it in your experts' affairs where you find it applicable and necessary and relevant. And the book concludes the situation that has formed on the European stage is a stalemate kind of situation, is a dead end. And if we don't go through the process of reformatting the relationship between the EU and its key stakeholders, the situation will exacerbate further, and the sovereignty of the EU will be further reduced. But this reformatting, this resetting, will inevitably face the problem of a leadership deficit. Some of the peculiarities of the European elite that I will probably speak in my part of the presentation. This completes my talk. Thank you very much for your attention. I really regret that you were not able to get printed some materials, but you will all get those thumb drives. And that's probably even better because it will give you the ability to immediately promote this information and disseminate it. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Komleva, Professor Komleva. Everything you've said, I would like to subscribe to everything you've said. And we have eminent experts sitting here. All of these things are quite clear to all of us, but at the same time, we do appreciate the amount of work that went into this, the work that was done by Mr. Gasumian, and the evidence that he corroborated his findings with. And that is going to be very important for all of those who think that Europe can achieve peace only one way, through war. That's a very sick idea that is being promulgated quite widely these days. And I believe that books like this, research like this, is very valuable in the sense that these people, colleagues, whatever you call them, partners, would they realize that this is the path that leads to hell. Thank you so much for your conclusions. At the end of our symposium, we'll have about 1 hour for an open discussion, and hopefully we will go back to the thoughts that we have just heard from you. And now I would like a video by Konstantin Zatulin to be played, and after that, Ms. Komleva will have an opportunity to present your own speech. Konstantin Zatulin is a major Russian statesman, member of parliament of the Russian State Duma, first deputy chair of the CIS committee, or the Commonwealth of Independent States Committee of the State Duma of Russia. And he is well known not just in Russia, but in Europe as well, but worldwide too. Konstantin Fyodorovich Zatulin. The floor is yours, Mr. Zatulin. Dear Chair, distinguished participants of the symposium, I'm happy to welcome you from Moscow, and I would like to express my tremendous pleasure at the fact that it is the second time during the first half of the year that you were able to gather in Bratislava, in the city of peace, to discuss the most relevant pressing issues of Europe and the entire world. We are very interested in a very open and transparent and honest dialogue with the Europeans, with the political leaders and public figures of Europe and of the entire world. Over the time that has passed since our previous meeting at the end of February, a lot of events have taken place that couldn't but influence the atmosphere that surrounds this symposium. Let me remind you briefly that President Vladimir Putin was re-elected as president of the Russian Federation. That happened in March. And then in May, President Zelensky, on the 21st of May, in accordance of the Ukrainian law and the constitution, basically lost his powers and authority, and it was decided not to hold elections in the Ukraine. And now we are facing the fact that this country that is involved in a conflict with Russia doesn't have a legitimate leadership.
Я не буду
I am not going to provide detailed arguments in support of why I think that. I think what is sufficient are the explanations that have already been provided along those lines, and what our president has said about that, which indicates that he knows the constitution of Ukraine and the laws of Ukraine better than many. Unfortunately, we see this situation where the same people in the West, in Europe and the United States, are urging Russia to cease hostilities and start negotiations, whilst competing with each other in terms of who can provide more weapons, long-range weapons included, to supply those to Ukraine. They prohibit, as Zelensky did a year ago, to conduct any negotiations with Russia, even to themselves. And at the same time, hypocritically, they blame Russia for refusing to hold any types of peace talks. This was the apogee of this was the so-called conference in Bergenstock, the Summit of Peace, but it was nothing but an attempt to manipulate the public opinion, an attempt to rally round the European countries and countries from many other continents, and to whip up confrontation against Russia and to condemn Russia. Let me remind you that on the 15th and the 16th of June in Bergenstock, this meeting took place. It was attended by about 90 countries. Well, if we can even consider full-fledged participation by the participation by the heads of states and unknown representatives, such as the Minister for Invalids from Australia, but Invalids Affairs from Australia. But the summit that was based around the Zelensky formula, the so-called Zelensky formula of 10 points, the desire was to condemn Russia, to urge it to stop hostilities and to withdraw troops. And as this conference was being prepared, its inspirers faced insurmountable difficulties and challenges, and they had to dramatically reduce their own ambition. Of the 10 points that were advertised as Zelensky's plan for peace, for establishing a firm peace after the conflict in Ukraine, the final document included only 3 items. And you know that those 3 and this document itself has been criticized by the radicals and the Russophobes for being so empty. And why are the organizers, who cannot be suspected of a lot of love for Russia, why did they decide to go down that path? But that's because they wanted to, well, they couldn't get enough signatures to condemn Russia, and so for PR, for the nice picture, for the optics of it, to be used later to manipulate the conference and the public opinion, they had to limit the scope of their ambition, on the way down to the fact that this led to just the statement that nuclear rhetoric is inadmissible. And of course, the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant safety was also a concern. Plus, they also talked about the safety of shipping in order to pull out grain from the Ukrainian ports. And they also talked about the exchange of prisoners of war. The old Russian military guards have always risen this toast. The toast was to the health of the wounded, the freedom of the prisoners of wars, and to us, the military. And of course, the return of the POWs is something that should be commendable, although the number of Ukrainian POWs in Russia is sixfold greater than in Ukraine, because many in Ukraine, and that is becoming obvious, do not want to fight and are surrendering on their own. But let's go back to the assessment of what happened in Switzerland. So, of course, we are upset by the fact that concerns us, that the document was not signed. It turns out that nobody was going to sign the document. It was just declared that countries support that. That was the source of confusion. But nevertheless, we saw that 42 European countries took part in that. That's what's concerning, including such countries as Slovakia, Hungary, Serbia, Turkey. Those countries who, through their real politics, are often in disagreement with the confrontation with Russia. And why did they have to support this document? Because they were exerted pressure on. And in Slovakia, you know what kind of pressure this could be. Just recently, we all really were horrified by what happened to Mr. Fico, who was victim to the actions of a terrorist who acted out of political motives, shot him out of political reasons, because he was viewed as a radical who wanted Slovakia to be joining the West in its fight against Russia. That's the terrorist that shot Mr. Fico. So that's what this pressure can result in, the pressure on the European politicians. And I think that Slovakia, Hungary, and Serbia signed this document. And they only had one justification for that. The document is not really that challenging. And, well, whatever you do, as long as it pleases you, directing this to the West, and may the US and the UK and France and Germany be happy with that. We certainly do not understand the entire complexity of the situation of the European nations that are in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and the EU. And the course of these associations depends on the will of the main participant of the Western world, the United States of America. And we understand that, we see that clearly. But what I would like to do is pose a question to all of you in Bratislava. What did Slovakia gain from participating in the meeting in Switzerland and from joining this chorus or choir of these voices? What was achieved in principle at this conference to which Russia was not invited? If you are inviting the participants of the conflict to a peace conference, but at the same time you do not invite the other party, that's not a peace conference. It's an attempt to rally around those who are against Russia. And that attempt failed, of course, but I'm sure that one of the things that they would do after the conference would continue to manipulate the public opinion and the mass media. Strangely enough, but it is not really that strange, on the next day, after the final document was released and after the item was included there that everyone who is in agreement with that believe it is important to reduce the nuclear threat and not to use nuclear rhetoric, Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO, said that the NATO countries are now in the process of bringing their nuclear warheads in a state of preparedness. Okay, Stoltenberg may not be really knowledgeable about nuclear warheads, whether one can even bring them to the state of readiness. But this is a provocative statement that says a lot about what the organizers of this meeting think about those points that they're trying to promulgate. and try to put into the minds of the Europeans. We in Russia are skeptical about what is happening or what happened in Switzerland, what transpired there. We do not attach any importance to them in practical terms. It's very artificial. It's very biased. And we sympathize with those countries who had to take part in that for whatever reason. But we are not untouched by the details of the conference and the discussions that are still remembered by us.
В качестве показательного примера той
I
атмосферы,
would identify as a showing factor of the atmosphere in this conference several episodes and several interventions. Firstly, our good friend, President of Poland, Andrzej Duda, stated at this conference that Russia remains, and I'm quoting, the largest colonial empire in the world, that, as opposed to European countries, has never gone through the process of decolonization and has never been able to deal with the demons of its past. So Mr. Duda, who is calling for killing as many Russian soldiers as possible in the same speech, has absolutely no problem saying at this conference and on other occasions that they in Poland would wish Russia to finally dissolve, or as the European Union calls it in its resolutions, federalized. What does it mean? It means that Russia has been put up against a choice, a very definite choice. Either we agree with such attitude from Europe, or we have to fight for our existence, which we are doing. So basically, what's happening in Ukraine now is at the same time the military action in two guises. On the one hand, it's already become a patriotic war of us, of the Russian people, against a coalition of the NATO countries that unfortunately includes those countries who wouldn't like to take part in that, such as Hungary, Slovakia, and others. And on the other hand, it remains a deeply internal civil affair, a debate, an argument that couldn't find its resolution back in 1901, but it came back up again now between those who would like to stay in this space that has existed for centuries under the name of the Russian Empire, Soviet Union, or call it whichever you like, or to and between those who are relying on the United States and the countries like that. These are not self-sufficient politicians and actors. And we see that Ukraine is voting with their feet against this conflict. People are fleeing from Ukraine. Ukraine has already lost half of its population, not as a result of the actions of Russian troops, but because the citizens are trying to flee. They're trying to get out of this trap that has been created jointly by the Kiev regime and its Western sponsors. Today, the borders of Ukraine have landmines. So the landmines are not in the front line, but there at the Western borders, so as to prevent people to flee from Ukraine, evading drafting. So you see that today the US, NATO, and those countries that are supporting them are actually finishing off Ukraine, killing the Ukrainian people, crucifying them on the cross of military action. That's what's happening. On the eve of the conference, President Putin have come up with his proposals, peace proposals. You can have different attitudes towards them, but they're based on reality. And nobody, including those who are inspiring this anti-Russian rhetoric in the West, I think, believes that a nuclear power, number two, or maybe even number one, according to the number of its nuclear munitions militarily during such confrontations. So why is it all being set up? It is being set up so that the war should last as long as possible, inflicting as much damage to both Russia and Ukraine, not in the first place Russia, but in the first place to Ukraine, and also so that the European countries should lose any right of speech and should follow unquestionably their hegemon, the United States. Nowhere before, never before in the history, the US has been behaving so blatantly. We know where capitals flee, where production facilities move, at which price gas is being sold in Europe. Where are all those people who were voting for self-sufficient Europe, for Europe to have its own voice that it has earned with its history? In actual fact, what we see today is that the leaders of the leading countries of Europe have lost any agency and self-sufficiency. This is what is surprising. But Duda, whom I recalled, and whose feelings against Russia are quite obvious, he wasn't alone in this conference. It was quite fun to listen to the new president of Finland, Mr. Stubb. According to him, it was Russia that attacked Finland. More than that, he found 30 wars throughout the history which Russia fought with Finland. Actually, if you go into history, where was Finland before 1918 when Russia, as a result of the revolution, gave its freedom? Did it ever exist as a sovereign state before that? Also, a joke. There's a joke. The joke is that for this meeting in Switzerland, some obviously dependent leaders of some African countries were invited, and one of them, President of Ghana, went all the way to really surprising things. He said, "We in Ghana have always been fighting with Russian colonialism and apartheid." Of course, you can build all your complaints about Russia on lies until infinity, just like President Zelensky is doing when he says that the Minsk agreements were beneficial for Russia to accumulate its forces to start the offensive, even though the signatories of this agreement, President Hollande and Chancellor Merkel, hurried several years ago to say that they signed the Minsk agreements exactly for the Ukraine to get this time out to prepare for the military activities. So it's all lies. It's all lies that coming up on surface that goes all the way to claiming things that have never existed, such as Russian colonialism in Africa. It's all lies, and it's becoming very dangerous to the future of the European continent. Of course, we will not forget and will not dismiss people like Stubb and Duda. We understand that today we can't hope for a union. We are not demanding, blood sacrifices from anyone in favor of our relations, even from those who are the closest ones. We'll deal with our problems ourselves, but the idea that Russia can be one, it is absolutely false. It will lead to nothing but chaos and Europe losing its face. This is what I wanted to say today, because our conference is being held immediately after the meeting in Switzerland, and I would like to bring it across specifically to you, people who gathered in Bratislava, that in all the situation, it's important that that one should be understood correctly. We would very much like to be understood in Slovakia, and Bratislava should be the capital of peace. But Switzerland, that we actually put on the world map as a neutral state as a result of the Napoleonic Wars, has actually because of its melting into ecstasy with the NATO countries, has lost the status of a neutral country. I would very much like, I would very much not like that countries like Slovakia, Hungary, or Serbia should lose this face either. Thank you for your attention and all the best to you during this conference. Thanks a lot to Mr. Zatulin. It's a pity that he cannot attend our symposium because he's under sanctions. Well, laughable sanctions, actually. But on the other hand, he only works with us, staying several thousand kilometers away from us. I have known Mr. Zatulin since 2010, when the president of Nagorno Karabakh, Pako Sahakian, invited us. I visited Nagorno Karabakh with the first chairman of the parliament of Slovakia, František Miklos. Before that, Mr. Chernogorsky, the prime minister at that time, visited me, and Pako Sahakian invited us to the beautiful city of Shushi, where we were introduced to Mr. Zatulin. And especially for the past 2 years, Mr. Zatulin has been doing really a lot to restore justice and fairness towards Nagorno-Karabakh. And his latest presentation at our venue in February this year, at the symposium, you may remember, he said that, of course, this question, this issue is hanging up in the air and it will find its solution. And if you look at how the whole world is moving, I think that it's not going to be easy to make sure that these problems to find a resolution. God forbid that we have nuclear war. God grant us that we can avoid the nuclear war, because we see the situation as such that the world is moving confidently towards the nuclear war, as I said yesterday. And this Slovakian symposium has its deep sense in shifting this apocalypse day as far into the future as possible. And I'm passing the floor to Mr. Prime Minister. Gentlemen and ladies, Slovakia today is going to win Ukraine, if only in soccer, in a soccer game. Okay, meanwhile, it's going to be on the soccer field. I thought you were going to say with the help of the symposium. All right, let me come back to Ms. Valentina Komleva, who will present her talk entitled In Search of the Peace Formula. You're welcome. Mrs. Komleva, I can't hear you. Philip? Yes, it's fine, it's fine. I was just muting the microphone not to be in the way. Okay. Hello, dear participants at the symposium once again. And to start with, I would like to remind you that tomorrow is the 22nd of June. That's the day when the Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union. And things that we're discussing today at the symposium should remind us of the situation that started on the 22nd of June in 1941, and what it ended up with, and what resources and losses had to be paid by all countries to arrive at the peace. That was an enforced peace. It was a peace enforcement. And of course, I wouldn't like to see Russia and its allies to enforce peace once again. What I would like to see is that this word peace should be achieved as a result of negotiations. It's obvious that the system of international relations, the current system, has now entered the bifurcation stage. There's this concept in systems analysis. The entire international hierarchy gets broken. The international relations structure gets broken. Old relationship principles get broken, and the most important things, the goals and purposes and meanings for which all the system used to function also get broken. The events in the past few years have a power of deep impact on the powers worldwide. It's actually a change of tides, of epochs. I took a look at the news that our press secretary posted on the website of our institute based on the result of yesterday's deliberations. It's known that at the stage of bifurcation, systems either renew or perish, and the actual option decides depends on the understanding of who's going to become the main actors in this change process. So the reforms should be started in time. We see that one of the key actors that could go for the reform path has chosen the war path and is gradually getting other countries involving on that path. So this choice was made by what we call collective West. When I'm referring to the West, I mean in the first place the ruling elites, the economic, political, law enforcement, military, and other elites. I'm not talking about common people. My experience of communicating with people in different countries, the experience of monitoring the institutes conducted in different countries, uh, means that, well, shows me that this caveat should always be made. It's not yet the war of people. The elites and people have a different way of thinking. And I must tell you that 2 days of my staying in Austria and my communication with the administrative bodies there persuaded me once again that elites and people take things differently. And so far, it is still possible to work with people so that people could hear other positions if the elites do not want to do that. So what's the purpose of Western elites? They openly state that the main purpose is to bring a strategic defeat to Russia. This is a quote that is being used today by many Western countries. This strategic defeat is understood and interpreted differently, but the main point is to make sure that Russia should stop being an actor in the international arena. They're talking about that openly. I'm not going to cite anyone. I'm sure you know these things yourselves. So basically, this is what the Western peace formula boils down to. The Western peace formula is based on the principles of the exclusivity and supremacy, and the whole system of relations is based on fear and enforcement. The main principle of building the international relations following the Western recipe, is the principle of punishment. Look what's happening. A criminal law is passed in countries that punish, punish, and punish. In the Baltic states, they punish for you to speak Russian. In Moldova, they punish you for having a relationship with Russia or for stating a position. In Ukraine, they punish people. In Armenia, the process has already started. Countries that don't want to live according to the Western yardstick are also being punished. Colleagues, look what's happening in Georgia today. Georgia today is now under direct threat of punishment and pressure. The question, what for? This is being done for the fact that this small country has dared to take a sovereign decision with regard to non-government organizations. The government just wants to know who is getting money from abroad and for what. And the US just can't understand how such a small country has dared to take a self-dependent law to protect their national interest. And what's happening? The US is saying, we're going to punish you. We're not going to issue you American visas or something else. Colleagues, the system that is based on punishment is not going to last for long. If in the past it was about a voluntary consent to the restrictions that partners had in the West. Today, it's no longer about voluntary consent. It's about using tools of force to enforce people to behave just like the Western leaders want them to.
So what we see is that all of these spheres are being militarized. The war is meant to defeat the foe, the enemy, and then there's the infrastructure war against the opponent. The infrastructure war is being waged. The information war is waged in order to militarize the information sphere and to really ensure that the will of the opponent is succumb to your will. So this war is more active, and the cognitive war is now being waged in full swing, which is to defeat the mindset of people, to raise the memory, and to develop new cognitive constructs, as if nothing had existed before. A cultural and civilization conflict is being provoked. Interface fragmentation is forged. The number of sects and cults is growing. And all of this is done to break up the cohesiveness of another people. This spiritual cohesiveness can be based on religion or on the ideology, on a common memory. And the blows are dealt on all of these factors. The war, of course, is needed by the West. And we talked about this today, and you talked about it yesterday, as far as I understand. It is needed for a variety of reasons. One of them is has something to do with the domestic problems. You can see that inside Western societies, there are problems, there are divisions. And this is caused by the degradation of the quality and the will of the Europe's political elites. They are no longer those political elites that were there during the times of Charles de Gaulle. And these political elites are not having agency. Quality-wise and will-wise, they're not able to deal with the problems that they are faced with, that the people want them to deal with. So they want to switch their attention to other issues. They want to transfer responsibility for their actions to other countries. That's one of those principles that they operate upon. Another problem is the replacement of the national interests of the countries with the interests of large transnational corporations, and the strengthening of these corporations' role in making political decisions. Another important problem that I would like to address is loss of existential purposes of the younger generation. Why are we living? What do we live for? How were we raised and brought up? What's the purpose of all this? Is this to decide whether you identify as a member of the LGBTI community or not? Of course not. The new meanings and purposes are imposed on the younger generation. Maybe that's because of the quality of education or of rearing up. But that's not the topic of my talk. It's probably a topic for a separate study, but I worked a lot with the youngsters in Europe. I was involved in education. We had dual diploma programs and academic mobility programs, and I know really well the education system in the EU. And I've spoken with those young people back in 2014 and even back in 2012 and later on in 2016. We discussed with them, what is the purpose of life? Why is Europe there? Why am I, as a young individual, a part of this world? Why do I exist? Why am I there? And they do not have an idea, concept of that, the youngest people. The other problem is migration. That has really provoked the need to start thinking about the preservation of one's identity. Even France had to think about its own Catholic roots. They had been fighting the clerics for a long time, and now they felt they've hit the wall, and they have to define what their identity is about. And of course, there's growing discontent within the European system. In the EU, there is a degradation of trust in the political elites. There's growing radicalization. There's growth of neo-Nazi and neo-fascist organizations. And war is a way to deflect the attention to other issues, to reformat and reset, and say that we are no longer responsible for what's going on. Everything that is happening in Europe now, and the world that you see and you will be living in, that's not our fault. That's them. That's our external enemies' fault. Another reason why Europe finds it advantageous to continue to wage war, it's associated with the ability to have resources that will allow the countries to maintain their leadership for the long term. I'm talking about the green metals. I'm talking about the so-called feedstocks for the energy transition. And the West doesn't have a lot of those resources as such. And that's why the West is beginning really to contest who owns those raw materials in the future. Their leadership depends on that, and their position in the world hierarchy depends on that. Otherwise, this whole idea of sustainable development and green transition is going to be a failure. And we see now that these failures are occurring already in the West. This is the new civil religion that is being born. It is something that's introduced in society, the new mantra, sustainable development, sustainability. It may never happen. And then what would you believe in? What kind of society are we going to build? That's a big question. As the formula for peace was being developed by the West, the West started to develop its defense industry. Let's not talk about the roots of the conflict in Ukraine. I'm sure you've talked about that a lot, and it is being talked a lot about. Yesterday, Vladimir Putin spoke about that. He expressed our position about that. But amid that, as the search for formula goes on, the West started beefing up its defense industry and to fund countries that are against Russia. Of course, this is not just a way to deal with one's political problems. This also plays into the hands of political, or rather transnational, multinational corporations. You only have 1 minute left, Dr. Komleva. Just 1 minute. Please wrap it up. I do apologize. I was told that I have more time. Okay, I will. Mr. Khazin is going to be next. And he has to be at another meeting after that. So we could stop you or interrupt you, and then we could continue with it. I will shorten my presentation. I just wanted to talk about some stats about the participation of the EU countries, including Slovakia, in the development of the Ukraine's defense industry, and the participation in the alliance of the defense industries to organize joint production of weapons. and participation of companies in the development of joint ventures in Ukraine. As a result, these countries, all of these European countries, are helping the Ukraine to beef up military standards, to beef up military production and align the military standards with the NATO standards. I wanted to talk about the blocking of information channels and about how Moldova is losing its agency and sovereignty. I also wanted to talk about the reasons for the loss of trust in Western policies, but in the end, I wanted to focus on what is Russia's peace formula. And here I would like to ask for some time to finish. And Russia has finally formulated its position during President Putin's speech. The establishment of the multipolar world on the principles of justice and equity, international cooperation on a win-win basis, and what's important is the development of an equal and inseparable security architecture for Europe on non-inclusive and non-discriminatory basis. And since Russia talked about its willingness to provide Eurasian security, we would like to recall the words, "Do not wake up, do not poke the sleeping bear." So I'd like to ask those who are responsible, do not wake up the bear. I really was scared when Russia said that Russia started talking about assuring Eurasian security to implement those goals that I've spoken about. I wanted to say, what is Russia doing right now? Please draw your attention to this. Russia is beefing up its potential and its own power. The sanctions had given it the opportunity to activate its internal potential. Primarily, we are concerned with ensuring our own food security, improvement of our social policies and social guarantees to our citizens in the country, development of our research and information technology sovereignty. Russia today spends colossal, massive resources on the development of logistics, transportation, communications, the infrastructure, and the development of strategic regions, primarily in the Arctic and in the Far East. Russia is busy developing a new financial system where settlements would be made in national currencies, so that independent payment system could be set up. Russia is involved in diversifying not just its foreign economic activities, but also foreign political ties to develop new international institutions. Everyone who is capable to analyze see that such institutions are being formed, forged, developed, expanded, and the range of political agreements of Russia with other countries is growing. Russia's priorities include increasing its activities with the countries of the global south, the east, and the global majority. In addition, Russia plans, together with Belarus, to develop a charter of the multipolarity and diversity in the 21st century, and that is a strategic vision for multipolarity and multilateralism as the new system of international relations. That will be the alternative to the Western-centric world. Russia is involved in developing some values within the society that would be underpinning its existence amid the sanctions, hypocrisy, lies, fake information, strangely enough, and amid the fight that Russia is waging in Ukraine, we see that social immunity is being formed within the Russian society against the Western influence. There's growing mistrust with Western policy, including information policy. And what we can see in Russia is some wave of the Russian spirit that is on the rise. It's like the lava on the volcano that is bubbling. Now, I don't want it to really blow up. And in other words, as Gorchakov, Russian diplomat, in the 19th century, Russia is concentrating, Russia is focusing, and it is busy to beef up its resources, strengthen its forces, expanding its partnerships to defend its formula of multipolarity, where Russia would be one of serious poles of leadership. I would like to also draw your attention to the fact that was part of my presentation that the history knows a lot of examples where Russia had acted as the guarantor of security in Eurasia in 1812, in World War I, and Russia as relations with China and Vietnam. There are a lot of examples. I would also like these examples to be compared with examples of what intervention of the United States ends for countries, especially considering what happened recently, 25th anniversary of the start of NATO's aggression against Yugoslavia. That was the tragedy of the Serbian people and many other peoples who welcomed me on their land. Every new international event shows that the number of people who support Russia's position, Russia's peace position, is growing. Mr. Zatulin spoke about the conference that took place recently, or the number of them, is this showing that the world majority is getting more cohesive. And in conclusion, I would like to say that all information resources of our institute are open for publication of opinions by experts. The most interesting evidence-based opinions, well-argumented opinions that were expressed at the previous meeting, symposium, were published in our magazine, but I sent our version to Lubitsa since I couldn't bring it to. I hope that it will be distributed, and I would hope that you can send us your presentations, and we'll be happy to publish this in the magazine that we publish in Russian and in English. Thank you very much, and I apologize for going overboard and for condensing my speech. Thank you, and I do apologize to Mr. Kazin for taking so long for us to give him the floor. I'm happy to introduce our next speaker, Mikhail Kazin, a member of the Club of Vienna, PANAP, the Mikhail Kazin Foundation for Economic Research, Russia. Mr. Kazin's book is very valuable. It has been translated into the Slovak language, and it is being disseminated not just in Slovakia, and Mr. Buzek is also disseminated in this book in the Czech Republic. Mr. Kazin spoke twice at the meetings, at various events of the United Nations, at the Security Council, with an extended version of his presentation. It is a great honor for us to listen to your presentation, dear Mikhail. The floor is yours. And his microphone needs to be unmuted. Thank you very much. I do apologize for rushing this. I have not too much time. I'll be very succinct in my presentation. I'll be speaking quickly. And I understand it'll present a problem for the interpreters. In the recent times, Western politicians are saying that a lot of destructive forces are destroying the world of that is based on law. That is forgery, a clear one. And here's why it's happening. In reality, the destruction and the undermining that is happening is that of the economic model that underpinned this world, that is the governing world order. I'm not going to be talking about the objective reasons why this economic model is falling apart. A lot has been said and written about this. I've written a book about this, which was released 5 years ago, moreover, together with Andrei Kovikov. We published the first book about this about 20 years ago, the eclipse of the dollar empire and of the Pax Americana. So there's a crisis, the degradation and the breakup of the economic model, the current economic model, is an objective reason, and you cannot stop it. Further on, because all of the heads of states and politicians theoretically should have raised this question and do something about this. Well, they have kept silent for many years. Again, the first symptoms of this process were evident about 20 years ago or so. And so these politicians are now bearing personal responsibility for what's happening. Nobody wants to bear this personal responsibility. They're trying to shift blame using forgery for that. And they are not just using mistruths and lies. It's creating an absolutely destructive situation because nobody is really talking about the real problems that the world is facing right now. This rules-based world that the Western politicians like so much cannot exist, unlike, well, separate from this Bretton Woods or otherwise known as the economic model of today, for a very simple reason. The resource for the rule-based world is provided by the dollar-based system. If that is falling apart, then those who control those rules and provide their execution cannot do this.
And what the previous speakers said, that it is force and power that's being used to control the situation. This is a sign of weakness. And now we're coming to the most exciting thing. As a result, those who understand what needs to be done have split into two large groups. Group one discusses what needs to be done to bring the situation back to normal. It is this group that is trying to blame somebody else that they are destroying something. This is an absolutely destructive position, trying to reinforce a building that has no foundation makes no sense. It will fall in shambles anyway. The other group is doing something else. It is trying to devise some new rules. This is undoubtedly very exciting, but the problem is that in order for the rules to be really implemented, you need resources. What kind of resources are you having in mind when you are devising your rules? And nobody's answering this question. So therefore, this activity is also destructive. Yes, when my daughter was little, I composed fairy tales for her, but what relationship does it have? What does it have to do with the reality? And for this reason, I think that today one should be discussing new rules so much. And by the way, I have my own ideas about that. And maybe these are not the most foolish consideration because I've been dealing with this subject for 30 years. I have, given a lot of explanations about the current processes long before they became obvious to everyone. The key task today, objective today, is to define those subjects of political life who will have a right to discuss these new rules. So, roughly speaking, who is going to sit around the table at the new Yalta conference? Okay, if you don't like the name of Yalta, let's call it a new Vienna Congress or new Westphalian Conference. Who are going to be those forces that will define the economic models and the rules that would match these models? Please note that this subject is absolutely closed, absolutely taboo. Perhaps because somebody doesn't understand that this is the main subject today. So once these forces, these people, these representatives get together, they will be discussing the new rules. Even today, they've already mentioned this. And let me remind you that in 1815, in a similar conference, a decision was made to create Switzerland. And it could have been a different solution, decision, theoretically. So unfortunately, I think that the key problem of today is that people I mean political actors, are discussing the wrong kind of problems that need to be solved. Once again, I have a lot of considerations. What kind of rules can be instituted? What kind of rules somebody may want, but they are not feasible? And which rules nobody wants, but they will emerge themselves, because that's what the objective situation is leading to. But there are other people who have other considerations. And so today, what one needs to do in the first place is to understand who are those actors who are going to discuss these rules, roughly speaking, whom we are scrapping out of the political life. And we know at least several actors, several players who, roughly speaking, are trying and claiming at their right of participation, but there's no real arguments for them to be included. Let me ask just two questions. And by the way, these are rhetorical questions. Question one, is Great Britain, the UK, going to participate in this conference? And question two, is Iran going to take part? Even the discussion of these questions can yield a lot of interesting conclusions in terms of contemporary geopolitics. So I think one should come back to the right kind of questions. Thank you. I thank you for your attention. Thank you, dear Mikhail. One of the most exciting presentations that we heard. It was a brief speech, but very deep. Yes, we mentioned several times yesterday that it's the end of the rules that have been created by one party, let's say the Anglo-Saxons, and it's the beginning of the new international law, which nobody understands what it is. But what you have just exposed actually opens our eyes to what needs to be done and what we can expect. So thank you for this. And I think that well, we've organized a special conference once where you presented your new theory, new economic theory. And I'm still under impression of that event. And I'm even dreaming that if we managed to organize things differently in Armenia, we should try and make an experiment on implementing those ideas that we've heard from you. I can describe it as a theory of new socialism. It's not Marx, it's not Engels, it's not the Chinese variant, it's a Mikhail Khazin variant. So thank you. Anybody has any questions? No. Thank you a lot. And I'm sorry that we kept you waiting so long. And now I have a great pleasure to give the floor to Mrs. Karine Georgian, member of the Vienna Club, a politologist, Orientalist, a representative of the Armenian Unions of Russia, of Europe in Russia. I think you all know Mrs. Karina Georgian as a politologist, so we'll be listening to you attentively. Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me? It's all right. Yep. I will support the tone set by my friend Mikhail Khazin. Well, actually, yesterday I told you a joke about whether you're interested in boxes or check pattern or having a ride. So let me just continue this, how the situation transposes over these two macro regions. The current situation on the globe, as a politologist rather than an economist, is seen by me in the following way. It tends to a collapse with acceleration, it will resolve as a force majeure using non-conventional weapons, because conventional tools are not enough. Neither Europe or US have enough production capacity to produce enough conventional weapons. I'm not even going to discuss that. Russian gas, uranium, enriched uranium. We know what's happening in energy. Mr. Grigoryan passed my information in due time to his friends in London, and it caused a shock there, because without the corresponding energy supply, starting the production of conventional weapons for such a beautiful war, and I'm just being sarcastic. It's just impossible. So the only option is to employ the non-conventional weapons. This can include nuclear weaponry, biological and chemical. By the way, chemical weapons are already being used, and other banned kinds of weapons. Like Israel has used phosphorus bombs in Palestine. Also, phosphorus munitions have been used by Ukraine against their own citizens in Donbass. But somehow the media kept silent about that. But let's just look at the facts. What's happening? This is already considered as admissible. I mean, the use of non-conventional weapons. It's about overtones windows. Okay, so it's already accepted, so we can go to the next step. And the same about the biological weapons. Against this background, of course, the natural disasters are going to be absolutely catastrophic, and we know that what's happening there is also quite overwhelming, because countries will just not be able to cope with the natural disasters. And the reform of the system, and I fully join Mikhail Khazin's opinion, will not help the system. It has to be transformed. If somebody is thinking that it's my idea, no, it's a quote. And by the way, I'm quoting the work of an outstanding American and very respected specialist on management systems, Russell Lincoln Applefone. He was an old man, and he said this at about the same time when Mikhail Khazin and his and my friend Andrei Komikov wrote a book about the end of Pax Americana. So Akov wrote this about the same time. You need to choose the right path. We're following the wrong path. We're going to fix errors that are going to multiply the problems with our corrections will just provoke the multiplication of problems. He was an old man at that time. He didn't fear anything. And he knew what he was talking about. He was a member of the boards in the largest international corporations. But nevertheless, the world didn't go that path. And so what's happening now, right now? Some people has called them the collective West, headed by the US, even though it's clear that even in the US itself, there are several groups competing with each other. And this competition, this is quite a hard fight, but I'm not going to dwell on that. That's not my purpose. But so this consolidated West is trying to stay dominant at any price, but at any cost. But they're not coping because they need the resources to do that, whereas they don't have the resources. And the reason is quite objective. The United West have a catastrophic degradation of management tools. The contradictions between strata within the West are growing, and that will also come to surface. And the competition between these strata, it appears, and I'm sorry, that a fight is going on for the for the control wheel of Titanic that has already run into the iceberg. I'll try not to allow myself such metaphors, but I can't help doing that. The measures taken by these countries do not help them to achieve their goals. Problems just multiply. For instance, will the confiscation of Russian assets help the US? And again, this is not my subject, but I need to mention this. Considering the huge amount of debt in the US, with a humongous and rapidly growing government debt, any lack of trust, any decline in trust to the American securities will bring about a rapid growth in the cost of its servicing. So if the assets are confiscated, will Russia suffer? No, Russia has something to answer with. Russia has several dozen billion-dollar worth assets belonging to American companies accredited in the United States. So all, affiliates. Russia has something to answer with. Now about non-Western countries for their victory and keeping their position. They don't have a common strategy. Problems there are of different character. Like my mother used to joke, if the question is about something being sour, don't give an answer about something being green. So here, it turns out that in the West, the problems are sour, and here the problems are different, they're green. So you understand what I mean. You just can't compare the fields where these problems lie. And this also includes the lack of a venue for dialogue. There's no turf for conducting a dialogue. There's no field where you could conduct a discussion. There's dialogue. It's not about the lack of desire. It's not about propaganda. It's not about just politics. So these countries don't have a common strategy. They're pinning their hopes on the tactic of responding, of making the opponent to respond all the time and getting tired of that. The process of institutionalization of different formats is going slowly. I mean, BRICS, and now specifically about Middle East and the Caucasus. How much time to have? Improving the dynamics in the process of changing the world order with the growing amount of conflicts in the top league, and I mean the Security Council, bloodshed in the Middle East, the growing trends towards getting Europe involved in the military confrontation with Russia, and the deterioration of the level of trade and economic interaction between EU and China creates higher risks and new opportunities on the other hand. Risks, I mean. They are about the commitment of the authorities and the societies to the previous scenarios. I have Kamil Serkanov from Azerbaijan, with whom we discussed this quite a lot. Here, take Azerbaijan, the Uranian project, pan-Turkic things. Let's build our own separate, beautiful Turkic world. And just like in that joke about a rabbi, we're going to have Thursday and let all other people have Saturday. But it doesn't work this way, it's clear. But nevertheless, it does happen. This inertia is still running. They have already brought down to the catastrophic minimum the chances for consolidated action between all the three actors in the Caucasus, not to mention that Armenia and Azerbaijan are actually virtually in the state of war. The actions of the leadership of Georgia indicates that they don't want to stay in the zone of political turbulence, but they're not yet at the decision level. At the diplomatic level, the peaceful settlement process has somehow started. It is being supported by Moscow, Beijing, London, Brussels, and I mean the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. But the purposes are different, dear friends. So, therefore, I think I quoted in the previous symposium in March the quote about the League of Nations. If you want war, talk about peace. I know I'm paraphrasing the well-known parable, Civis Pacem Parabellum. And why? The leadership of Armenia at the recursive of Baku is conducting demarcation without legitimization. It's not approved by the parliament and the Ministry of Justice. So they're just putting the border poles. This provoked the protests from Tavush, headed by Archbishop Bagrat. I am not going to hide it from you. I can say that though the consolidated West, in order that the
не подписала продление
Well,
договора.
Saudi Arabia didn't extend the agreement with the United States, and so let's forget about the petrodollars. That's how it works. So these empty assets may not be that important. Since they have bases around the world, they will try to invest them somewhere. And who has large assets? It's Vatican in the Armenian Church. And the fact that it was the church that initiated this movement in Armenia, that was driven by the fear for the fate of the flock, but there's also that. Let's not forget about the fact that Armenian church has a lot of assets, including financial assets around the world, including real estate. It's an interesting topic, and you could ask me questions about that later on. Indeed, people who follow the Archbishop are not interested in the fact whether this has been registered with the Ministry of Justice or not. They want the government of Nicola Pashinyan to resign because of many other internal events and circumstances. And then let's talk about the victory of Azerbaijan. Okay, they won, so what now? But all of these minutiae details are creating the possibility of a new bloodshed, a new war. And in such a war, an ally like Turkey and such a partner as Israel cannot really provide Azerbaijan with the same level of support as they had before. They won't be able to. I don't want to dwell on that, but many of you are aware of the economic problems that Turkey is facing. Erdogan hoped on the 9th of May to sign an agreement with the United States that would have given him a lot of preferences. It didn't work out. It means that the situation in the Republic of Turkey is getting worse. I'm only stating facts. And the second point I wanted to talk about are the new opportunities. These opportunities are associated with the promise of creating a large currency and economic zone with the logistical infrastructure along the Northeast project that was signed by Russia and India. An agreement was signed to that effect, and Iran is part of that. So this area is getting clearly delineated. So what needs to be done is to stop the inertial processes that were launched by the previous processes and develop a format for interaction that will not have the losers. And if to the Northeast project you could add or append the Central Europe, then this is going to be a promising project. And in that sense, this is a chance for the Central Europe. It remains as a chance for that. Now let's talk about the Iran and Israel conflict. I believe that the leadership of Israel has made huge miscalculations. And again, I'm not judging. Today, Armenia recognized the state of Palestine. That's the news that we heard today. By the way, so what kind of miscalculations I've seen on the part of Israel? And most importantly, there is this conflict between Iran and Israel. But note, that's interesting to note. Maybe I am the only one who noticed that in the 45 years, no one in the world has not once suggested to develop a diplomatic format to solve and resolve the conflict between the two nations. Even now, after the two countries have exchanged direct strikes, we see only a response, a reaction, whether they were right or wrong. Restrain yourself, do not do this, do not do that. But the format, the diplomatic format, is not there. And I believe this is the result of a series of miscalculations on the part of the Israeli leadership. Initially, the United States and Israel were not interested in having such a format until the 2000s only. The United States was the main partner of Israel in the Middle East, and the Israel factor allowed the United States to strengthen its positions in this oil-rich macro region and strengthen its influence on prices in this field. They believe that the Islamic fundamentalists in Iran after the revolution will be technologically backward and will be too archaic. But according to Bloomberg, Iran is in the 10 top tech-developed countries of the world. What are we going to do with that? In 2001, there was an invasion of Afghanistan and an invasion of Iraq in 2003. That was a reason for the leadership of Israel to think about this more. But at the end of 2001, well-informed Israeli expert journalists and deputies, and even the former head of Mossad, came to Moscow to have a conference and discuss what kind of new world we're living in. And we suggested to them that we discuss what is this fraud for Israel and for Russia, the situation in Afghanistan. They did not want to talk about that. The only thing they wanted to talk about was the Western Bank, the West Bank of the Jordan. And somebody even asked them, can you look further than the West Bank? Or is that the end of your horizon? Even back then, they didn't respond to that. Since 2003, Iran has been methodically and steadily increasing and reinforcing its positions in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. ISIS should have prevented that from happening, but this only accelerated these processes. And Mikhail hasn't mentioned Iran for a reason when he spoke about who's going to be sitting at the negotiating table in the new Yalta. I wouldn't be surprised if I see them there. And Israel felt that the ISIS radicals are not dangerous for the country. Conversely, their activities in Iraq and Syria will weaken the enemies of Israel and Iran in particular. And I believe that Russia's response to the West in relation to its actions in Ukraine was not just the annexation of Crimea and the into 2014, but also a creation of the military base in Syria. So that's when Russia started playing on a different field, understanding that there are opportunities to reduce the potential of its future counterpart, the counteragent. With all of the difficulties and controversies between Moscow and Tehran, this only led to the rapprochement between Moscow and Tehran. The Israelis were not concerned with the fact that the key export product of the United States for the first time since 2009 became oil, which reduced the value of Israel as an asset for the United States in geopolitics. I'm not going to dwell on that. I believe my thought is straightforward and clear. I think that this could be skipped through some of the things. My presentation is going to be published, so in any case, I wanted to say what's interesting is that this reminds me of one episode. I asked an Israeli colleague some 8 years ago, whether Turkish politics can have some risks inherent in them for Israel. He redirected the question to a retired Israeli general, and he said, no, categorically not, by adding that Turkey is their strategic ally. What's happening now, you can see that. It didn't happen right away. There are a couple of things that I wanted to say here. I'm not going to go into that. My time is up. Okay, that's it then. So here's what I would like to say in the end. This is not just a crisis. This is a pre-catastrophic state. There is a theory of catastrophes. It doesn't mean that in this catastrophe everyone is doomed, but some are doomed in major numbers. There are not that many different options that one can pursue in this situation. Either the geniuses and heroes find non-trivial solutions to this multi-part problem and will turn it into a set of tasks for which solutions can be found to take us to a new path. That's what Russell Larkos spoke about. Or that'll be the catastrophe for the majority. And I apologize for saying this in my presentation for it not being so female and so gloomy. Ms. Gevorkyan, one of the most interesting and bright presentations during these 2 days. Certainly, we have lots of questions. We have a former ambassador of Slovakia to Iran. He knows Iran really well. And I hope that once we start our discussions at about 1 p.m. local time, we will have a lot of questions for him and for you, Karine. It was an interesting overview about the South Caucasus, and I have lots of thoughts about that. So we'll try to have that discussion in a very active format. And I would like to thank you again for a very professional analysis you've made and for giving us a lot of food for thought. And now I have the honor to introduce to you Mr. Kamil Askirhanov, economic analyst and expert in management theory, member of the Truth Street Club, Azerbaijan. He will talk about the potential contribution of the South Caucasus countries in assuring stable peace in the region. The floor is yours. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to speak at this forum. I would like to make a segue to what Mikhail said about the destruction of the Pax Americana, and the topic that we are discussing here are inclusive of wars, including the war in Ukraine. This is all a global evidence that the Pax Americana is in decline, and decline leads to wars around the world. As with any single model, when it gets destroyed, this means that a new one will have to be created, and that goes through war. The last 30-year war led to the new economic mode of production, such as capitalism. So the previous one dies, and then something like that happens, and now a new episode of that is occurring before our eyes. But I would like to say a few optimistic things. Against the backdrop of these wars, the decline of the Pax Americana, new alliances and connections are being formed. And we believe that we need to make up for the losses, and a new world contours would have to be developed. We discussed this yesterday, that we see some areas where Slovakia is trying to find a way to establish dialogue with Hungary. And walk in lockstep with them in Europe. I have a lot of experience of interacting with different peoples and cultures. I've had an opportunity to observe, analyze, and synthesize my observations. My attention was always attracted to one quality: how a human, a company, a country deals with new challenges. Experience and knowledge turned out not to be sufficient to deal with something that's unknown and dangerous. And I realized that I need the will and I need like-minded people around me. The combination of these factors increases your chances for success, not just for one personality, but for the entire community, the international community in our case. In the South Caucasus, which is a unique place in many ways, there are three independent states: Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia. We are surrounded by three major neighbors: Iran, Turkey, and Russia. They actively take part in the events of the greater Middle East. And they have been doing this for many centuries. They are major players in this region as the actors of this big game. They are some of the most important actors of the political processes that really accelerated after October 7th, 2023, the well-known situation in Gaza, in Israel, in Palestine. Throughout the 20th century, South Caucasus countries had to be in a condition of war twice, when for the first time in 1917, the Russian Empire broke up and then the USSR fell apart in 1991. Unlike that period, in our times, the South Caucasus countries are dealing with the issues of post-conflict world principles on their own. We've gone through the phase of military opposition and are trying to search for stable peace. South Caucasus countries are led and headed up by countries that have the mandate of their peoples for the peace. They are legitimate. However, the events of recent events in Georgia and Armenia are a cause for concern. The interests of outside players could destabilize the region, so the intervention of these forces in a small region could have a negative effect on the situation there. We cannot establish the peace there in a normal way, and we really want to. We want to build a single economic space within the region to have stable peace. Stable peace in our region would open opportunities for accelerating economic development and prosperity of people. New international transportation routes are being formed, such as west, east, and north-south corridors that are changing and making our countries closer. Our participation in such global projects will prompt South Caucasus countries towards economic integration and developing a common market. The regional processes that we see in the South Caucasus region are happening amid what is happening against the backdrop of what we call Pax Americanas breakup. As the history teaches us, when a hegemon is leaving the scene, and we're talking about the United States hegemony, it leads to a whole series of wars around the world. And while the global destabilization is happening around the world, a very different picture is happening in the South Caucasus. We understand that what is happening in the greater Middle East will define the future of not just this region, but of the entire human civilization. These are large-scale events that help forge new connections and alliances, and these new connections will reduce the negative effects of the breakup of Pax Americana. A number of countries are creating new relations to protect themselves from the negative sides of the current global economic model, and there is a strategy for searching for new contours of a new post-American world. I believe that we need to analyze the events very carefully to see the shades of the new, still unknown world. And I believe that countries of South Caucasus are one of such places where this new world could have a chance to take very specific shape. And I believe that in our region, we have very good conditions for the activities of multinational, large international corporations, plus large national companies are being formed there with whom we are going to see forged interaction with larger companies. Azerbaijan is not in a position of a passive observer. My country is an initiative full of energy and assertive player, both on the political and economic fields. And thank you very much for your attention. Thank you. You've really stick to your time limit. I appreciate that very much.
Что у вас есть оптимизм, который я тоже.
The second comment is that I appreciate your optimism, and I would like to share it. I have a few questions, and perhaps we are going to come back to them during the discussion time. But the fact that you're such an optimist, and you believe that in our region, the Anglo-Saxon influence is tending to a minimum. Unfortunately, I can't share it. Quite on the contrary, I can say that in Azerbaijan, the influence of the UK, especially in the energy sector, BP has entered the country in the beginning of the 21st century and is keeping control quite forcefully. And it's just a catastrophe to see how agents of influence are playing. There are, I think, 200,000 organizations that are being paid for by the West, out of which a few dozen work quite seriously in this respect. I envy Georgia, who found the strength to somehow stall it. Let's see where it goes. But in Armenia, the influence of the United States, of France, negative influence, is unfortunately going on. And only a new, strong, nationally oriented government can stop that. Well, of course, our orientation has always been towards Russia. In the Soviet Union, we even lived quite successfully with such an aggressive neighbor as Azerbaijan. Well, it's half joke, but half truth as well. So in the Soviet time, we were able to coexist. And for a long time, we somehow had a way to influence the nationalist tendencies that peoples of the Soviet Union were experiencing. The Baltic people have, I think, lost their mind now, judging by the Russophobia. Whereas in the Soviet times, it's surprising. I myself was a dissident. I counted the Communist Party, but take 1988. I started my political activity as a leader of an environmental movement on the 20th of February 1988. That was the first large meeting in the territory of the Soviet Union that later refocused on the liberation of Nagorno-Karabakh. I didn't even know that was possible. And I tell you, I came back from Germany, from the Humboldt University, and there were these patients with environmentally induced viruses. I was a candidate of physics and mathematics. And so my thesis was about the potential of atmospheric pollution. I was the first ecologist in Armenia, and I managed to organize this movement. What it ended up with? Well, I can now say in a failure. Well, Mr. Grigoryan, just to add to what you're saying, this is quite an interesting fact, and I think that Mr. Astrakhanov will support me when I say that in the Soviet Union, quite an interesting stratum of people was created, intellectuals who indeed were able to find a common language. Those were educated people who, even if they had different opinions and approaches, were able to maintain a high standard of ethics in mutual dialogue. And then a negative selection happened in all republics and all the former Soviet Union countries, I mean, in South Caucasus, that includes Armenia and Azerbaijan, and maybe in Georgia a little bit less than Armenia and Azerbaijan. So my apologies. Okay, thank you. In every case, yeah. In any event, we're going to have an opportunity to come back to the subject during the discussion time and maybe expand a bit on it. I would now like to invite our glorious colleague Irina Sokolova, a politologist from Italy, to present a paper entitled "The US and Russia, the history of confrontation and the new scenario." You're welcome, Irina. The relations between Russia and the US have certainly been difficult since the end of World War II. But we should be more precise and fair in saying that, in fact, it was after Winston Churchill's Fulton speech that the world clearly faced extremely difficult relations. Anglo-Saxons are not a single people. It's not a brotherly people. Churchill was hoping that it would be the English-speaking world, this community of intentions, and international commonwealth of all peoples with English as their common denominator, a unity of political and strategic intentions. But it doesn't actually exist. The US relations with Russia have always been very unstable. There have been presidents who flexed their muscles, like Truman, Eisenhower, the Bushes, and even Obama and Biden, and presidents who sought détente, such as Kennedy, Nixon, Reagan, and Trump. The isolationist vocation of the United States is not the only reason why parts of American foreign policy have always hoped for a softening of relations with Russia without leading to excesses. What needs to be understood now is that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the world seemed to be moving towards unilateral control of power, making Washington the sole great manager of the world's conflicts. I said earlier that the Bushes flexed their muscles, certainly. Both the father and son were interventionist presidents, especially in foreign policy. But they tried to maintain the border. And this border ran along the former borders of the Soviet Union. They wanted to keep George H.W. Bush tacit and unwritten promise not to expand the American sphere of influence within the boundaries of the former Warsaw Pact. A sort of silent habitual agreement to show good intentions and not irritate the bear too much. Russia, which was hoped to remain dormant and enter a period of cooperation. I didn't mention Clinton earlier. Clinton was not just an interventionist. He was the godfather of America's worst policies towards the world. His military actions in Kosovo entered directly into that vital space that is the cradle of the Slavic Serbian people. And Russia, historically, played the role of the great defender. of the Slavic people. This role was inherited by the Russian Federation as well. Clinton ignored Boris Yeltsin's desire for a non-military solution and sent troops to the Balkans. This was the first approach within boundaries that everyone considered insurmountable. From that moment on, there was less and less hesitation about approaching the borders of the former Soviet giant. But this state of affairs was temporarily interrupted by the Bush presidency, which, although extremely aggressive in the Middle East, never dared to try and directly attack Moscow's strategic interests. This has even led to talk of the Russian Federation possibly joining an expanded NATO. During the Obama presidency, when foreign policy was largely carried out by the Secretary of State, former US First Lady Hillary Clinton, as part of the so-called Arab Spring, an aggressive policy began to be pursued against the entire Middle East as never before. Obama destabilized the entire world and saw the role of absolute hegemony of the United States, presenting America as a supposed protector of the values of freedom and democracy throughout the world. So much as to say that Russia was a regional power. Joe Biden continues the most radical policies of the Clintons, a policy that is now flawed, as it's seen in the light of today's situation. The BRICS countries themselves are now demonstrating that a one-sided peace is no longer possible. These countries are not necessarily friends of Russia, but they prefer to support it in strengthening a multipolar world, since the latter significantly increases their negotiating power and weight in the international arena. Moreover, Biden currently appears to have failed to learn an important lesson in international political strategy from one of his distinguished predecessors. Richard Nixon showed a great foresight as a politician in relying on Henry Kissinger to negotiate a permanent detente with China. Kissinger, a man of great culture and a brilliant diplomat, understood that the alliance between Russia and China presented a problem for the United States. In fact, the Cold War era upset international relations because it was a natural consequence of nuclear arsenals. The atomic bomb prevents us from considering total war as an effective tool for solving international problems. War of attrition was the primary means of fighting the Cold War. The Americans continued taking part in this war with Vietnam, but a single bloc between Russia and China represented a multitude of people, an incredible amount of resources, a huge number of routes, landing sites, and opportunities in favor of the communist world. President Nixon's visit to Beijing and handshake with Mao Zedong led to permanent detente in China's alienation from Russia. Essentially, this allowed the Americans to win the Cold War by weakening the Soviets' commercial footprint and damaging their economic prospects. They couldn't effectively recover from the Afghan war of attrition. Currently, the modern world lives in an upside-down situation. Joe Biden's aggressiveness towards Russia is not balanced by a policy of appeasement of China. Indeed, paradoxically, Biden has taken every opportunity to reaffirm the strategic role that American influence should play by committing vast military resources to both Europe and the Pacific. A strategic mistake, like few others, given that Europe has long not been adequately armed to be able to support Americans' commitments. And in the meantime, the United States is unable to independently support efforts that could serve to contain both the Red Bear and the Chinese Dragon. The reason is very simple. Biden is making two very serious mistakes. The first is that it underestimates the determination of its opponents, and the second, he overestimates the ability of the American people to resist and their willingness to act. The first ones, the opponents, do not intend to surrender to the hands of regional powers, and in this they are supported by all developing countries, including India and Brazil, who want to gain more weight in international relations. The American people does not tend, is adverse to military adventures that can drag on for too long and have no specific goal. Excessive military spending on third-party aid, whose effectiveness in this aid area continues to worry taxpayers, and little success in this area are not the best of most valuable ingredients for winning American elections. Biden will soon have to face a vote in a divided country. We cannot forget that the US Congress itself refused for months to approve the economic aid to Ukraine that the president had asked for. Therefore, the split lies not only in the plane of the public opinion, but also within the ruling class itself. Today, may happen so that the presidential election will prove Trump being right, not only because people are worried about the war, but also because a significant part of the ruling class is also worried about this war. Or better to say, a significant part of the ruling class is skeptical about the continuation of an all-out war on two fronts, the Pacific Front and the Western Front. Germany was torn apart by a war on two fronts. Today, the Pacific Front is much more unbalanced in favor of the unification of China and Russia. In addition, other important scenarios open up. The anti-colonialist rhetoric that has permeated the cultural elite of Western universities has also permeated public opinion in those third world countries that want to sever centuries-old ties with ancient colonizers. What happened in Niger symbolizes a new course of events. With too many new fronts likely to open up, America that cannot afford to prioritize, containing China can't afford to scatter its energies throughout the rest of the world. Thus, a renegotiation could take place, pushing for respect for zones of influence, creating a distinction, if not permanent, then quite stable between Trump's America and Putin's Russia. I thank you for your attention. Thank you. Thank you. Before we move on with our symposium, according to the agenda, and give the floor to Mr. Denis Kruglov, I would like to ask to a diplomat well known in Slovakia, ex-ambassador to Arab countries, to Iran in particular. He also, as well, his last position was in Uzbekistan, in Central Asia. He is quite a well-known diplomat in this country. So, over to you. I apologize. for needing to leave this event quite soon. So therefore, I asked the organizer and my friend Ashot Grigoryan to give me a floor just for a few minutes. I came back from Riga here and happened to be here and just wanted to respond to Karin's presentation. I've spent 31 years in Muslim countries, starting with the south and going all the way to north. Sudan, Egypt, Libya, Iran, Iraq, Uzbekistan. I'm an Arabian expert and I'm a graduate of MGIMO. In 2015, there was a meeting of MGIMO graduates or alumni in Yerevan. And at that time, everybody was quite optimistic, except for me, because that was the top of the Arab Spring. And I said that there's no such thing as Arab Spring. That's the worst scenario from the outset. I also took part in another panel about Iran opening to the world. At that time, everybody was optimistic. The nuclear deal, sanctions were being lifted. But I had experience, 7.5 years in Libya, the Gaddafi, when that situation was happening. So my life position is that I'm a realist rather than a pessimist.
Well, we were talking about today's world, and I have to respond to what has been said, that the elites are doing something. The people that rule the United States are not the voters who either prefer the Republicans or the Democrats. Behind them are those who are in charge and in control of everything. And they allow these two groups to compete, but within certain constraints, to ensure that they continue with the system and continue being in control. I used to believe in democratic elections. But what kind of democratic elections can we talk about if, in order to become a governor of the state, you need hundreds of millions, and then to become the president, you need billions of dollars? We have a law here that the campaign needs to get money from sponsors to have equal opportunities for everyone. Let's all give money to one foundation. There will be 5 participants in the race for the office, and everyone would get 20%, for example, equal. Nobody wants that. So I can tell you, elections is what is done through media and by means of money. And then we talk about, deep state or Masonic things and the East London and the bankers. And I'm glad that Karina is back. I'm not going to talk for long, but I wanted to raise a couple of questions. I was waiting for the moment when we were going to talk about the Middle East and the Arab world and the Caucasus, to say that in addition to that, the largest conflict is the Israeli-Palestine conflict, or is this Iran-Israel conflict? But I could maybe prepare a speech, a fundamental one, but where is Libya today? Where is Algeria? Well, it was mentioned briefly, but where is Chad? Where is Mauritania? I miss that, perhaps because I spent 23 years in Arab nations and then in Iran, and then on in Uzbekistan. I personally know the head of the League of Arab States. He's my personal friend. I met with Gaddafi and both Assad and with President Mubarak many times. And of course, Bashir in Sudan and others. We need to understand here in Europe, which is very few understand here in Europe, what is the Arab world? What is it? Well, first of all, we need to say that it doesn't exist. But let's agree for argument's sake that it does exist. And if that is the case, then we need to go along several countries. What makes them common is that they are all parts of the League of Arab States and the language that they speak and write. There are more dialects there than in the Slavic languages. And by the way, Slovakia can become a member of the League of Arab States if you read the terms of that league. That's why you have the Comora Islands, which is not an Arab state. And even Israel discussed that, whether they should join this league if they meet the criteria. In the end of my brief intervention, I would like to thank all of the participants. Unfortunately, I couldn't be present here. My flight from Riga was in the afternoon. And I wish you a very successful continuation and conclusion of today's symposium. So when you are preparing the topic for the next one, if interested, I could participate in that as well. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Mr. Boriv, to you. But since you spend all of your time in Latvia, we couldn't include you in the roster this time, but next time we'll make an arrangement beforehand. And we'll have the honor of having your presence and hearing your presentation. And now I would like to give the floor to a very interesting young researcher, a diplomat, a top-level diplomat, despite his young age. We met in December in Belgrade, where I was there with the Prime Minister of Montenegro and the candidate for president. And I'm happy to introduce to you Denis Kruglov, a coordinator of the non-governmental organization Russian Balkan Center in Belgrade. This is a very rare thing. This is not an American NGO, it's a Russian NGO. But he's based out in Serbia. Dear Denis, the floor is yours. And your topic is anti-Russian sanctions and the Balkan region, assessment and prospects. An interesting topic. We are all ears. Thank you very much, dear Ashot, dear colleagues, dear participants and moderators of our today's discussion. Allow me to present to your attention my brief speech dedicated to one of the most relevant and urgent topics of contemporary international affairs and relations, the regime of anti-Russian sanctions imposed by the West against Russia. It is noteworthy that, while in the past sanctions used to be part of a set of measures of influence installed by some countries against the others, today, in addition to that definition, we can state that these sanctions are also an indicator of the sovereignty and independence of a given state. The first time before our eyes, we see how the monolithic unity of the countries of the Western Bloc is disintegrating because of the difference in interest of its members and their unwillingness to sacrifice their sovereignty in the name of achieving unclear and incomprehensible goals pursued by some Western partners, especially the United States and Western Europe, in pursuit of imposing more and more anti-Russian sanctions that lead to the degradation of international relations and of the global economy in general. I'm referring above all to such countries who have shown their independence in the EU and were able to protect their sovereignty on a number of geopolitical issues. I'm talking about Hungary and Slovakia, who have chosen the path of strengthening their sovereignty and pursuing a nationally oriented policy with an eye solely on their own interests. As for the Balkan region, I cannot fail to mention Serbia and its policy of balanced neutrality. Belgrade has been better than other countries in the region in maintaining geopolitical balance and not joining the anti-Russian for more than 2 years, guided by two factors that characterize a sovereign state: the will of the people and economic expediency. And if we were to talk about the first factor, it is certainly dominant in Serbia. More than 90% of Serbs are categorically against joining the Western sanctions against Russia, and the authorities necessarily consider the opinion of the people, which unfortunately does not happen in other countries of the former Yugoslavia. On the contrary, there, especially in Montenegro and Northern Macedonia, they blindly follow all the instructions of the United States and even initiate some steps and actions aimed at eroding and destroying relations with Russia against the will of their people. And the second factor is economic expediency and the understanding that imposing or joining the anti-Russian sanctions will inevitably hurt the growing Serbian economy, which in particular receives gas supplies from Russia, stable supplies from Russia, on the most favorable terms in Europe, on a par with Hungary. At the present difficult time, Russia and Serbia are working effectively, and agreements are reliably implemented in the interest of Belgrade and Moscow, which is a clear expression of the presence of sovereignty based on strategic national interests. The traditional long-term nature of gas business agreement is there, and that is why Gazprom and Russian company has always based their long-term investments on a long-term bilateral interstate, inter-country legal framework, which also influences a correct price for the consumer. Since January 2021, after the launch of Turkish Stream, supply started to be made through the Zaječar point, which goes through the Turkish Stream through Serbia. Today, all gas supplies go through this very project, which includes Turkey, Bulgaria, and Serbia. Gas supplies are carried out in a completely safe mode and are not dependent on the current political situation. And the creation of this new route is a confident example and the basis for Russia-Serbian energy cooperation. It should be emphasized again that the gas price for Serbia remains the best in Europe on a long-term basis. And as for the basic contract, which expires in 2023, it has been extended for 3 years until 2026. So we have to state that Serbia's policy is an example for the whole region, especially where it comes to maintaining one's neutrality and pursuing one's national goals of development and economic development, as evidenced by all the relevant indicators and figures. For example, the Serbian economy grew by nearly 4% in the first half of the year, while the economy of most of the EU member states is experiencing a deep recession and a setback in a number of areas. And that is why, under the current conditions, it is extremely important to pursue a balanced policy that meets the demands for strengthening sovereignty, as well as not to follow the lead of some Western countries, which have actually lost most of their sovereignty and autonomy in terms of making foreign policy decisions, including on the issue of joining and implementing anti-Russian sanctions. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Kruglov. That was very succinct, very clear. What you are suggesting, by using the example of Serbia, that Central and Western European countries could realize their advantage. What's better, to sanction Russia and ruin their economies, as Germany has done, or look at the wise Serbs and see how well they develop their relations with Russia economically. And in that sense, that is one of the goals of our symposium. That is to ensure that we could assure that anti-Russian sanctions are stopped, and so that an agreement could be brokered with Russia, that Slovakia could assume the role of and the function of a country that would be distributing the energy resources that could be getting from Russia along the friendship and brotherhood pipelines, the oil and gas pipelines, respectively, something that they could work on with their neighbors, the Czech Republic, Austria, Hungary, and use the largest European hub, the Baumgarten hub. I never hated Tchaikovsky, so that's okay. So there is a fantastic chance as a result to rent Baumgartner in Austria and then Slovakia would become an economic giant for Europe and would politically have a great clout. And before the catastrophic attempt on the life of Mr. Fico, I had I had sent him some materials in writing, and I hope that as soon as he feels better, we're going to follow up on that to start that process. I think this is quite realistic. I'm not rosy-eyed. And given what's going on in Ukraine and considering the transformation of the Western world that is happening before our eyes, that will lead 100% guarantee of that to the fact that the example of Slovakia would become an example really for everyone, including Serbia's example that could be quite useful. And maybe Mr. Kruglov, through our good connections in Serbia, could include in this Slavic center Serbia. Slovenia is also ready. I've spoken to them as well, Bulgaria. Well, we'll be listening to Mr. Evelyn Pirvanov in a few moments. Hungary has a chance, and their leader is in that. So the goal of our symposium isn't exactly in that. And I'm sure that over a short period of time, we're all going to get to the result that we set out to achieve. And most importantly, the capital of the world, the capital of peace, rather, is going to be Bratislava. That's where the peace agreement between the West and Russia will be signed. I'm not talking about Ukraine and Russia because Ukraine has nothing to do with this at all. This is the war between the West and Russia. And Mr. Hummel wanted to respond, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I share your analysis and two questions. It's okay. Yeah? I need assistance, I said. Let me pose two questions, Mr. Kuglov. First of all, did you see any indication, we have a double effect here, that due to the low energy prices, UK or Serbia could attract more foreign investment? Because not surprising, German investor or German companies are looking for location where you have competitive energy prices. And maybe second, some remarks on your relationship with China, because I think Serbia's policy also shows the EU that you show that you stay independent and want to be pushed in one direction.
Ответ не хотим слушать?
Would we want to listen to the answer? Mr. Kruglov, are you going to answer? Yes, thank you very much for your question. Very briefly, let me say that Serbia characterizes, well, it's characterized by the fact that it has a lot of partners. And as for China's role that is growing around the world, that is a fact. China has lots of plans to involve Balkan countries and some Central European nations, such as Hungary, in their fold. And the recent visit by President Xi on May an agreement that was signed between him and Belgrade. That shows that China has serious plans for the Balkan region and for Central Europe. On the other hand, Serbia has always maintained a multi-directional policy, and she had many things to offer to maintain constructive relations with other countries. And whenever the opposing country was showing the same, they had very good chances to develop such relations. And the German companies are investing in Serbia thanks to the cheap energy prices that is still supplied to Serbia, precisely because of that. And that is what attracts investments from Germany, Austria, and many other Western European countries. That is the presence of fairly cheap feedstocks that allows them to develop their own business. And in that sense, Serbia has a goal of joining the EU. That's a long-term political goal. Whether this is going to happen or not, that's a rhetoric question. It remains open. It remains to be seen. But the trend that we see in the world are showing us that it's unlikely that something like that is going to be achievable before 2035. And it's hard to predict what kind of world will be that we will see in 2035. So in that sense, the sovereign states such as Serbia, they are looking for alternative ways to develop their economies and their interests. Thank you very much, Mr. Kruglov. I can respond to Mr. Hummel, the number of countries that are friends with Russia. They receive gas at low prices. Slovakia has a 10-year agreement, 10-year long agreement, and some were unhappy. The price was $220. And in Europe, the gas was at the level of $2,000 to $3,000. That was phenomenal.
$165.
Armenia, $165. Belarus, the lowest price. Yeah, they always had the lowest price, $140. That's the prospect for Western countries if they restore their relations with Russia. They said Russia is not only a supplier of gas and oil, but also of uranium. Slovakia has 2 nuclear power stations, Yasensk in Bohunice and Mahovets, and they are purchasing also at a special price the heat-emitting elements from Russia. Also, the goods that are available in Siberia. It's absolutely impossible to understand why Germany, that used to be the most important partner for Russia, supplying them with high-tech products, and got via Nord Stream 1 and on to Nord Stream 2, as it was planned, gas at a very affordable price. Why they took this position? Well, maybe Mr. Alexander Ra will be able to answer this, who is also a professional in energy. And of course, if he's not afraid of coming back to Germany after that. So what, Alexander, are you afraid of going back to Germany after you say something, or will you say something? I would like to ask a question in this connection to the respected expert. It's clear that the pipe is still there, and nobody is going to disassemble or destroy Nord Stream. Everybody is waiting what it's going to end up with. It's absolutely clear that liquefied gas from the US cannot replace the pipe gas that has been supplied to Germany for decades to provide for the growth of the economy. We're not suiciders in Europe. And by the way, in the US, they also restrict the production for environmental reasons. We in Europe should also think about how to better use the natural gas. And the pipe is there. So my next question to Denis. What's going to happen with the Ukrainian pipelines? What kind of information do you have? Ukraine is saying that on the one hand, they want to receive liquefied gas from the US, from Germany, closing all the pipelines from Russia. But on the other hand, there's information circling around that if the West wants these pipelines to be used, why not selling them off to the West to get money in return? So let the West deal with gas purchases from Russia directly. So in this connection, do you think this is a possible prospect? And by the way, Russian gas is not under sanctions, but should sanctions be introduced against Russian gas, why can't you imagine a situation that after some time these pipelines will be used to pipe Kazakhstani gas, just like it's happening with the oil from Kazakhstan or Iranian gas, because there will be a demand for that. What, from your point of view, Denis, is the prospect for the Turkish stream? We hear that the volumes are not that high, but on the other hand, it's the main hub today, and Turkey is going to become the main hub to supply Europe, or wants to become one. How do you see this prospect? Because the EU will hardly be as harsh vis-à-vis Turkey as with Russia, and they're not only going to supply the Russian gas, but also gas from Azerbaijan. And Nord Stream 1 and 2, let me repeat myself, nobody is going to disassemble them. Can we, in theory, imagine that they can be used to carry non-Russian or semi-Russian or physically Russian, but non-Russian according to the documents, to be transported to Europe? Yes, Mr. Ra, thank you very much for your questions. I will try to briefly answer every one of them. Let's start by saying that the energy security is the most important thing that exists today in the world. What's going to happen with the pipelines? As you see, the special military operation has been in operation for 2.5 years, and these pipelines have not yet been exploded, blown up. I mean, the pipes going across the Ukraine. On the other hand, the Baltic pipelines have been blown up. Why has it been done? Exactly to put the whole world, both Europe and Russia, in a situation that will have to find a way to solve the energy security questions. Russia has always been interested in building a correct collaboration with the EU, a polite collaboration with the EU. I know that representatives of all the European countries are actually exploring the possibilities of importing gas from Russia via third countries, including Serbia. Everybody has their own interests. Everybody is actively hiding their own interests from everybody else. But on the other hand, everybody understands that the winter is coming and the rates in the US are going to hit the economic potential of practically all European states. As to the pipelines running across Ukraine, I think they're going to run just like as they have. Gazprom is not yet under sanctions, including Gazprom Bank. The main mechanisms are still in operation in spite of the heat of the passions and everything else was happening. As to the Turkish flow, Mr. Orban said last year that if same thing happens against the Turkish law, he'll consider this to be the act of war and the act against the Hungarian sovereignty. So yes, indeed, internal frictions in the EU, in Europe, and the energy issue will only be a catalyzer. As to the supplies of liquefied gas or some other alternatives for Ukraine, I think there's no real alternative currently. Ukraine is a transit country, and if you take Serbia, for instance, they're now actively building the storage facility, Banatski Dvor. Part of the gas is stored in the territory of Hungary. So these gas projects allow strengthening bilateral agreements between countries that have chosen a path towards sovereignty. And this is the way for them to address these questions. I think that all the projects that have been suspended now or undermined thanks to some Western leaders and partners, they're going to be restored after the special military operation. This is what always happens in history. How long it will take is difficult to say, but I think throughout the 2020s, we'll be seeing difficulties, looking forward to restoration in the 30s. Thank you. Quite a professional answer. I would like to focus your attention on the fact that Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 was each 75 billion cubic meters of gas capacity. Bratslava, Slovakia, 50 billion cubic meters. As to the South Stream that was supposed to pass through Bulgaria, didn't have as high capacity, but it would still have been quite helpful for South European countries to have cheap gas. Turkish Stream, well, the Turkish hub is not getting enough gas through this pipeline. So they're also supplied additionally from Azerbaijan, Tanap, and I think Shaktihiz. Azerbaijan as such has about 7 to 7.5 billion cubic meters. It's almost nothing, but on the contrary, it helps so that there shouldn't be any gas shortage in Azerbaijan and Turkey themselves. On the other hand, Azerbaijan could also theoretically buy gas from Turkmenistan. But there are some political games going on from Gazprom. Gazprom is piping some of its gas from Azerbaijan using these pipelines. So the situation with gas is quite serious in Europe. So the South Stream flow could have been used successfully via Bulgaria. It was actually suspended not at the wish of Bulgaria. I know a person who saw how Prime Minister of Bulgaria had a meeting, or 20-minute long meeting with McCain. It took them 20 minutes. He entered the office of the Prime Minister, said, Mr. Prime Minister, you're not going to go against our interests. And after that, Bulgarian Prime Minister suspended South Stream. So, roughly speaking, this is a heated and unfair war that has put Europe to its knees. So what's going to happen in the near future? You're quite right, Mr. Kruglov, when you're saying that this will be decided by the special military operation. As soon as it's over, everything gets settled to its right place. And our symposium has a purpose to help it happen at least a day earlier, so as the peace agreement is enforced to be signed, and I'm and insist on the word enforced, because if we wait until the Anglo-Saxons are agreeable to do that, nothing will happen. I would also like to invite Mr. Pirvanov, a deputy of the National Assembly of Bulgaria, the 50th session. Mr. Pirvanov wanted to attend yesterday and today, but for you to know, such processes happened in Bulgaria yesterday that he said that he absolutely has no right to be away for even an hour, and he stayed in Bulgaria. Mr. Pirvanov, together Mr. Chernogorsky, had a great presentation in Moscow, visiting our partners. And I asked my partners for him to be sent to us. And so we have to be happy to have him in a video recording, and then we're hoping to continue the future, the collaboration with him direct. If I may ask the video to be played. Or is he going to speak to us direct? Philip? Without the sound. Hello. I welcome everyone who has joined the Bratislava Forum. Bratislava, the city of balance, equity, and peace. The city that has a tradition of putting an end to wars, starting in 1805. The peace agreement concluded in this city put an end to the largest war in Europe. Today, Bratislava is such a center of peace, balance, and calmness. The city that always stays in our history as a city where people discuss and come to an agreement. I will repeat the greeting that you liked at the forum in Moscow, and I'm hoping that it will help you to achieve the goals that you have set for yourself. In the beginning, there was the Word, and God was the Word, and Word was with the God. Those people who have always been led by the Word have long been called Slovenes, because the word Slova is the word. Slavic people are the ones who put the word Slova, word, and God in the first place. Cyril and Methodius were working on the alphabet. Their children came to the Bulgar kingdom in the Bulgarian kingdom in the Balkans, where they created two major schools that today would have a status of academies in the political capital, Bratislava, and in cultural capital, Ohrid. The disciples of Cyril and Methodius developed a unified system of communication among all Slavic people. This is our alphabet that the disciples, in gratitude to Cyril, are calling Kirillitsa, or the Cyrillic alphabet. I will now read you this alphabet in its original form. The first letter, Az, Buki, Vedi, Glagol, Dobro, Est, Esm, Живот, Zelo, Земля, Ije, Iji, Ijit, Gerv, Kako, Люди. Мыслите. Наш. Ом. Покой. Рeci. Slovo. Tver. Uk. Oak. Fert. Her. От. Си. Черн. Ша. Шта. Р. Eri. E. Yat. Yun. Edo. Om. Yom. От. Йота. Ота. Кси. Пси. Тита. Ижица. Ижа. I wish you all success in your beginnings, in your endeavors. I will always be happy to be together with you. Our cause is right. The peace should reign everywhere where our civilization is present. I welcome you in the city of Bratislava and all the people who take part in this forum. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Pervanov. And then I will especially pass your thanks to him. It was this that this intervention that he made in Russia, and that's why I asked him to repeat it. And there was a very exciting intervention of his partners, Mr. Chernogorsky, but he decided to present us with his yesterday's speech. I'm hoping you're still going to repeat it. I can give any one of you a brief, an opportunity for a brief intervention,
Then
and then I will invite you
break,
for a break, after
and
which
then you will
we
have
have an hour as a minimum
an hour to say what's on our hearts.
share the most difficult words that
Please
we
go
have in our
ahead.
hearts.
It's hard to discuss both politics and economics at one symposium together with existential and substantive problems of today's world. But I was really touched by this approach, including the quote from St. John's Gospel. Well, the Russian civilization is one of the logocentric civilizations, and we have to understand the following. I'm not pretending to say that the German civilization, for example, wasn't logocentric at one point, but it stopped being one. The only thing I remember is that logos was interpreted by Hegel as an ideal, an absolute ideal, or an ideal absolute. But what's confronting logos? It's the myth. What we are discussing now as the propaganda, as the rules, as something else, that's the substitution for that substantive logos, the ideal or perfect absolute. I also noted that this was followed by a system of legal rules. Mr. Chernogorsky might not support me in this, but I'm aware of the following. Maybe I'm going to say some very naive things, but Russia lives within this system of the continental law, and the same goes for the rest of Europe. And Russia's continental law is based on the Justinian's code. The same is true for the European system. You know that in the British Isles and in the United States, they are using common law that is based on precedents. It's very opposite to what we use. The EU, made up of different countries with the traditions of continental law, is switching to the system of precedent-based law de facto, in actual fact. That's amazing. This reminds me of an old Russian joke when a Jew, Rabinovich, comes to a Russian bathhouse and he is saying, well, Mr. Rabinovich, you either put on your Speedos or take off the crucifix. It's either one or the other. You cannot exist within a system that splits you apart this way. Okay. The last stage of the globalization over the last 30 years under the Pax Americana was characterized by a system of maritime trade, which was created by the British from the legal standpoint, which was based on the precedent law, common law. And most recently, we were shifting accent or focus on the maritime trade, and that's why there was this heightened importance of straits in maritime shipping. But inevitably, the pendulum will go in the other direction. We'll be getting back to the continental law. We'll be going back to the logocentric civilization of ours. I cannot imagine the situation go any other way, because the alternative is a catastrophe. So we'll be going back to the communication, to the continental pipelines. Mr. Grigorian, you talked about pipelines. That's what I'm talking about. Because delivery of American LNG is done using maritime shipping, but production of LNG, despite all of the declarations, are falling year after year in the United States, and there is no way to bring it up, despite all of the claims that have been made since March of 2023. The production of shale gas in the United States, shale oil in the United States is falling. It's unprecedented. And that's why Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. stopped issuing new licenses for further shale exploration. What is Europe going to do in this situation, having built LNG terminals at their ports? The entire system is a part of a myth, not of a logos. And the myth is believed by many. And that's what I was talking about, the inertia basis, the inertia nature of scenario. The first to stop this inertia, and I would say stop it, will switch to reality. But this reality, going back to what I started with, has a legal, economic, political, and geopolitical components. But on top of that, it has this substantive component, and that is related to how we think, related to our position in this world. They are quite deep concerns, and that's related to metaphysics. And I apologize for using this term. And that's quite scary. That used to be even indecent and prohibitive to use the word metaphysics recently. And I'm just raising questions. We want to take a comprehensive approach to this, because it is impossible to resolve trade, legal or economic issues if we do not agree about this substantive content of what's going on. Thank you. Thank you, dear Karine. I suggest that we take a 30 minutes long coffee break. And after that, we can start our discussion. What is very important for me is to prepare a very well-worded appeal, a statement or address to the heads of states of large countries and largest international organizations. I hope we are going to be successful in that endeavor to reach some consensus and develop such an address that I will be presenting then to our Slovakian partners, Lubos Blaha, Uhrik, and others. and then we'll sign it and send it out. And that will give us the basis to start working with the partners and experts so that we can start this as early as September, so that we could hold our third symposium with the involvement of strong parties of this world, the powers that be. That's our dream, and thank you. I'm inviting you to a coffee break.